This video contains spoilers.
Nobody cares about spoiler warnings! No, I just wanted to say that I clicked on this video against my own decision just to go straight to the comment section, since that is the one thing I know how to do. And not that I expect you to care, but I think you should care about the fact that Tales of Berseria is objectively worse than Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild,
Nope.
Super Mario Odyssey,
Nuh-uh.
Nier Automata,
Wrong!
Injustice 2, Persona 5,
Are you high on cholesterol?
and Horizon Zero Dawn!
It is not! Wait. What's the Horizons? Alright, fine! You saw through my clickbait, you scurvy-infested scallywags! So I can't convince you that Tales of Berseria is the true best game of 2017 when I haven't even played every game made during that year. And I know for a fact that the comments are gonna bring up games that I never mention. But if nothing else, let me ask you a question. Do you know why birds fly? Daily Mentalgen who watch my videos and are subscribed, due to your epicness, we are finally doing it! 5 years after this game's release, Tales of Berseria is going to get the long overdue retrospective that it more than deserves. But to begin with, I just want to say that yes, title was for clickbait purposes. I am sorry, I don't normally do this, I swear. But in actuality, games like Mario Odyssey, Nier Automata, Persona 5, Tekken 7, and most of the like are all great games. And as for the games I haven't played, like Horizon Zero Dawn, I'm sure that they're just as good as everyone says they are. And I am not trying to downplay any of those games just for one video. I think I've been pretty vocal on how much I hate it when people do that, and think that would be better off if people stopped being temporarily two-faced when talking about their favorite game. But I can claim with confidence that Tales of Berseria is my favorite game of 2017. Also, I will never not be upset with how the Game Awards randomly felt like not nominating this game for a single category in 2017. Then again, after 2020 having The Last of Us 2 win like 7 different awards that it didn't need, along with Xenoblade Chronicles DE not being nominated for anything, as well as Cyberpunk receiving nominations after the whole release controversy, plus Dream of all people getting nominated for Best Content Creator, let alone anything, after that cheating scandal, I think it's safe to say that the Game Awards are just as bad as the Oscars, if not slightly worse. Jeff, you're still a king though. There is also this flock of contrarians that pop off the moment this game is breathed in the air, even if the weather's not supposed to be cold. Not that it's the most mixed bag in the Tales series, but because the people that don't like this game are obsessed with their voices being heard. They really want people to know that this game is not good. It's mashy. It's worse than so many Tales games for reasons that will never be explained and end up getting no interactions on Twitter. Ever. I can think of a sufficient reason why they exist, though. Out of all the reasons why I'm so cross with Tales of Zestiria, there is one reason that greenly sticks out more sore than 4 doors adoring my face a little too much. You know how Shrek the Third was so bad that it tainted the entirety of the Shrek franchise to a point where the following film got swept under the rug, and the films beforehand had their reputation soured? Zestiria is not the same case, but apparently some people think that it is. They pretend that the Tales series has been on a decline because Dry Grapes are a journalist's favorite explanation, despite not giving any and making things weirder when you remember that their organization still gave the Tales games great reviews. And that's the story of how game trailers ceased to exist. But for real though, I don't know where other people like this came from, but I swear, LEGO minifigures have higher functioning brains than these people. What rhetoric are they even trying to pull? I've even seen people shrug off Berseria just because it's a prequel to Zestiria. Well, I mean, fair enough, because Zestiria is bad. But saying that the Tales series is going to die or should die just because of subjective opinions, while also refusing to elaborate on why these older Tales games are so much better than quote-unquote modern Tales, whatever that's supposed to mean, that's where I draw the line. On your face! Thankfully, Arise debunked each and every one of those claims just by existing. So for one, get rightfully f***ed. And for two, it's further proof that gas leaks do not kill massive video game franchises. If Final Fantasy is still going strong after 15 literally turned into a product instead of a game, then I fail to see why it should happen with Tales because of half of one hand's worth of games that are slightly bad by some jobber's personal standards. I detest Zestiria. It's an awful game, but it is not even 0.5% close to ruining the franchise. And do you want to know why that is? because Tales of Berseria is not only one of the best JRPGs on the PS4, but it was a nice return to form for the Tales series. And by nice return, I mean we're done taking your bullshit! I'm gonna tell you why birds fly soon enough, but right now, my name is Revenge, and I'm here to save my name! Okay, so maybe my name should not be determined by a 24-hour lecture on why you should play Tales games, because I could actually do that, you know. But all you need to know is that Tales games have been mostly consistent with creating riveting characters, subversive stories, and engaging gameplay. It got its name as, what I like to dub it at least, one of the big three fantasy RPG franchises, along with that of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, essentially defining the subgenre of action RPGs. Instead of being like Dragon Quest, which mostly stays the same in its first 12 major entries, for now, or like Final Fantasy, which is still trying to be way different from its roots, the Tales series is in this middle ground of constantly innovating itself while trying to maintain its identity. Up until Arise finally dipped its toes into the flow of mainstream media, Zestiria was probably the most ambitious title for the series. It added aspects from the rising action games and real-time RPGs, the former with combos being more streamlined, and the latter with fights taking place in your exact location instead of a generic playing field that happens to be in your area. It was incredibly different from every other Tales game, but what it did do was pretty awesome. Except for everything about it. This is honestly one of the most fundamentally flawed combat systems I have ever seen in a JRPG. It was a game that felt too hard with the cramped enemy encounters in the overworld and especially the dungeons, yet at the same time too easy because the armatization mechanic was broken. Berseria had a lot of nerve associating itself with anything about Zestiria, let alone its gameplay style, but it did remember a rule that some sequels seldom remember. If something is bad in one game, fix it in the next. You don't have to let it die with any remaining ounce of integrity that Danny DeVito had in 2013. If you choose to let it grow, sometimes it can become something better. Battle encounters were pretty much overhauled entirely from Zestiria to a point where every major problem was solved. Enemies rarely appear in any skinny trails, dungeons have a good balance between hallways and enemy farms, and battles have way more room to run around. So now we can highlight the new combo system. Alright, stick with me on this one. You're given some set combo trees that you perform for your attacks. You can customize the trees and even press different buttons to add some spices to your combos. Much like with any good recipe, mixing different attacks is necessary to the vast number of enemies that have contrasting elemental weaknesses. Berseria also has a Soul Gauge and a Blast Gauge. The Soul Gauge determines how many arts you can use per combo from 1 to 5. You can increase your Soul Gauge by defeating enemies, perfectly dodging enemy attacks to spawn soul cubes, or stunning the enemy. Also, if one of your allies die, they will lose 2 soul cubes, either allowing you to pick them up for yourself or giving your ally an easier time to build themselves back up after reviving them. If you have at least 3 souls, you can perform a Break Soul, which is a special ability unique to each character. Some require you to hit the enemy, some give a passive buff, and some perform an attack that may or may not only work under specific conditions. Meanwhile, the Blast Gauge is what allows you to use Mystic Arts and Switch Blast during a combo. Mystic Arts are pretty much like supers in a fighting game. Meanwhile, the Switch Blast allows you to swap your character with one of your inactive party members. They do require a sufficient amount of Blast Gauge, but the best thing about this is that you can use a Switch Blast mid-combo, so it works like an extension. A couple of other secrets include how you can hold the block button or Break Soul button to change the action of the Switch Blast, and you can even chain Mystic Arts after another if you hold down the Mystic Art button and a direction on the D-pad at the same time, though for some reason the game doesn't tell you about these two mechanics. But hey, it's cool to see the extent of where you can take it. It adds a lot of depth to what is otherwise a simple combo system. More depth than what a shallow mainstream gamer would normally be able to accept, absolutely. That is the Tales series for you. But trust me when I say it makes much more sense as you play the game. It's just a matter of how much you can learn on your own. I will admit that it is far from my favorite combat system in the series, but it is still one of the finest examples of blending depth and accessibility. It's even better when you remember that at the time, there were other games that tried this blend and failed. Berseria's combat manages to be an engaging combo system that encourages creativity and incentivizes exploring all of your options. even if some of those options are weirdly hidden.
But don't you know? The combat is incredibly mashy. You can just mash buttons and win for free.
Yeah, no, I'ma stop you right there because I really need to get out this bonus hot take of the night. The term mashy? It's not real. It's all in your head. There's not a single video game on this planet where reckless mashing is a viable strategy. And it's especially not encouraged in those games either. In Berseria's case, you're punished for mashing buttons. You see the soul gauge turning red like Twitter users do when they discover that happy people exist? That's the game's equivalent of TP, or MP if you prefer that term. The soul gauge goes from blue to red after using more attacks. A red soul gauge increases the end lag of your attacks, puts you in a form of block stun when attacking opponents that are blocking, and makes you more susceptible to getting stunned. And when you get stunned, you lose a part of your soul gauge. Even mashing buttons during a combo doesn't work, as some attacks can whiff if you're not taking your space from the enemy or the enemy's hurt box into consideration. Fighting games are the same way when the varied sizes and shapes of other fighters require different combos, or at least a different approach to those combos. Is it annoying? Sure. But it's not that hard to find a workaround for those scant situations. The only way I can understand people viewing Berseria's combat as mashy is if they're deliberately ignoring how the game works, and at that point they're just lying to the people. Oi, YouTubers, you gain nothing from lying to the people! That actually broke my microphone. Holy shit. Plus, remember that this game was supposed to be Zestiria, but not the worst pile of dog shit you've ever seen. So I'd say that they did a great job improving the combat system. Though, yeah, Velvet is way too broken. This bird is sure as hell flying, but this is not why. Maybe it has something to do with that killer soundtrack. Like the other Tales games, this game's soundtrack was composed by the gender-bent Yoko Shimomura Motoi Sakuraba.
Am I wrong though?
You may know him as a composer from games such as Dark Souls, Golden Sun, Kid Icarus Uprising, and even stupid bricks Unga Bunga. But when Berseria came out, he was able to strike back with a vengeance. Kind of. The soundtrack is a bit of a weird one for me. It's a great soundtrack, and I find the lack of uploaded extensions of music from this soundtrack disturbing. I wonder whose fault that could be. But there's a startling amount of tracks that aren't as memorable as they should be. And if I'm gonna be honest, the final boss theme is one of the lamest boss themes I've ever heard, as well as being a massive disservice to an otherwise fantastic villain. But the best compositions in this game are brilliant. Sakuraba-san did not slouch with the battle themes at all. To give a brief history/music lesson, because musicians only know how to teach music apparently, JRPG battle themes tend to follow one, maybe two select techniques while composing them. Some have a recurring leitmotif that is used throughout most of the series. Think something like this Scott Pilgrim movie reference. The wrong notes. Other games tend to use a select amount of instruments to create their own identity, like pretty much any song with, for lack of a better term,
major Persona vibes.
Berseria does both of these techniques for its soundtrack. Sakuraba has his little trills and fills that you hear in many of his other battle themes, and the 4 minions of the bad guy share a leitmotif in their boss themes. Not to mention that Velvet has her own leitmotif that is usually played during the game's more emotional moments. As for instruments, you'll often hear distorted electric guitars and high-pitched violin notes most often, perfect for a game based around a young woman yearning for revenge. Not that they're the only instruments, as the game does like to experiment with choirs, organs, and synthesizers, but the violin and guitar combo is crucial for this game's identity. The beauty of the violins being contrasted by the dirty-sounding electric guitars is such a perfect vibe for this game. You can sense this identity in the boss themes as well. These boss themes are some of my favorites in any video game. And that statement is saying a lot more than 4 years worth of Donald Trump's tweets. See, the joke is that Donald Trump got virtually nothing done during his 4 years as president. Am I epic yet? No. Can't we just let this fucker fade into irrelevance already? Please say yes, because I fail to see why the answer should be no. The most common video game boss themes try and focus on the big baddie right in front of you by having lots of minor seconds, tritones, Locrian scales, diminished chords, or whatever makes the boss seem stronger than it is. This is a perfectly sufficient technique. I mean, how are you gonna take a boss fight seriously if there's nothing to be afraid of, you know? But there's an underused second route for boss themes. Some of them are meant to pump you up and motivate you to beat this big baddie with fast tempos and strong melodies. Think something like Final Fantasy VI, VII, and VIII. Once again, Berseria combines these techniques with its default boss theme. It starts off establishing the boss's danger level with tritone intervals and quarter note drum hits, but then it builds up into something that feels much faster. Almost like Velvet will stop at nothing to achieve her vengeance, even if it means some giant monster that is in her way. The other boss themes are just as amazing, and they get creative with their instrumentation and themes. Justice of the Night is solid, but Lady Teresa's boss theme distorts it so much that it makes you feel uncomfortable, and I love it. Likewise, Melchior's theme perfectly captures the bizarre wizardry that connects him with... Nope, I'm not gonna say who. And Beat of Rangetsu is peak boss theme composition. I've been using this theme as a sort of running joke in my videos, but for good reason. But since I don't have time to give a 1-hour analysis on that, I'll just end off this section with one thing about the soundtrack that I need to address. Would you believe me if I told you that this is the first Tales game since Symphonia where every character gets their own theme? Yeah, I was surprised when I noticed this too, but I guess that after Symphonia, most Tales games would only have a theme for the main character, the antagonist, and maybe one more theme for the deuteragonist and or comic relief character. But that's not the case in Berseria. These character themes all brilliantly fit the character that they're supposed to represent. I regularly listen to all of them when writing scripts for my videos. They're just that good. Well, except for Artorias. He's a great villain, and he has an interesting answer to why birds fly. Let him have good music for once. Not only that, but they all have their own distinct instruments, chord progressions, styles, and or genres. Velvet's theme introduces that beautiful leitmotif, Laphicet's theme has great uses of ascensions and major thirds, Rokuro's theme reminds me of Dynasty Warriors in the best way, Magilu's theme is mystically quirky, Aizen's theme nails the feeling of freedom with a pirate aesthetic, and Eleanor's theme is a cleverly calm contrast with the other characters in the game. And they especially make more sense when you take the actual characters into account. As far as the narrative goes, Tales games have consistently been character-driven. This is unique in the sense that most YouTubers who claim to dabble in media criticism forget that this term even exists. Granted, games with character-driven stories aren't as common as they used to be. I guess I can understand why that is, because in a medium that's interactive, most modern game developers want to put more emphasis on interactivity rather than a story that could be told similarly to other mediums. This is how video games usually have their plots play out. Ignoring the fact that the medium of video games is one of, if not the most versatile mediums out there. But you know how I love to flex my 3 majors, which you would know already if you followed me on Twitter, but for some reason you don't do that. I still stand that video games are a lot better at fleshing out their characters than people often give them credit for, and I will never stop saying this. But I also acknowledge that it is easy to make a good story without having the characters as the primary focus of it. Arguably more so than books and movies. I mean, from what I've heard, Breath of the Wild has a silent protagonist with little personality, and It Takes Two has underdeveloped protagonists, yet they both won Game of the Year for their respective years. And sometimes other Game of the Year nominees have this interactivity as the base for their stories. Persona 5 also has a silent protagonist with a development that depends on the player making choices. I think his character gets misunderstood as a Mary Sue or a self-insert. Normalize deleting both of those terms from the face of existence. But the strongest parts of his personality are portrayed through the player making choices. I never found Joker's character development interesting until Royal came out, and even then, I only mean the endings of the 3rd semester. It was competent to be sure, but the length and pacing of Joker's development is heavily dependent on the player's choices. They can influence what Joker should do after school each day, which social stats to prioritize, who Joker should hang out with, who Joker should be in in a relationship with. And I don't want to be in a relationship with all these mediocre women. Another point is that giving a character a distinct personality can alienate people from a marketing standpoint. I feel that they shouldn't have to worry about this, but it has happened before. Alex from Yeek, a postmodern RPG, was probably the most hated thing about the game. But that's low-hanging fruit, and low-hanging fruit often gets covered in dirt. And you would think that people would infinitely prefer cleaner fruits, even if it means they have to climb higher branches. Travis Touchdown from No More Heroes has received some criticism about how his character, much like the content of the series as a whole, doesn't fit in some social contexts. I'm making a video as to why I heavily disagree with this, and I've even moderately addressed this in my No More Heroes 2 video. I'm not gonna say where that was, you have to watch the video and find out for yourself. But I can still see a tangible argument from those friends on the other side. I feel like there are tons of ways to subtly flesh out video game characters, and to be fair, there are modern video games that still do this. But in an era where most game developers today are more interested in the player's interactivity of the choices made in the game, it's valid why character-driven plots are pushed to the sidelines for games. However, to combat this issue, the Tales team has a specific method of creating characters in video game plots. Even if you're somehow able to ignore the skits which are meant to flesh out the characters by design, what they do is create a personality and a character arc, and then base the design around them. I've touched upon the subject of character design before, and it's nowhere near that simple or clean to explain, but I think I was fair to say that a good character design should tell you everything you need to know about them just by looking at them. But to add to that, a great character design will tell you even more as you progress through the story. And I feel that Berseria's characters followed that advice spectacularly. Just by looking at these designs, you can understand what kind of characters you're going to be controlling and what kind of setting the game takes place in. Then you're rewarded with seeing how the story connects the designs with the characters. Rokuro's a great example of what I mean. Right off the bat, you can tell that he's supposed to be a samurai, having the ponytail, hakama, and color palette. He's even got the front bangs. He must know when to say the right things and maybe play some guitar. These make him out to be something of an honorable warrior, but you then learn that he's a demon who has no strong feelings for anything, good or bad, which is a contrast to his samurai background. He almost doesn't seem like a demon given how drastically different he is from Velvet. But later on, you start to notice that his bangs are hiding his demon eye, and it flashes red during moments when he's pumped up the most. When that happens, you need to stay out of his way. But oh look, he's got an edgy big sword! Pity he can't actually use it. Sure, he's been training at House Rangetsu his whole life, but with the weaker short sword style. He keeps his great sword sheathed until it's time to kill his older brother. And if one great sword doesn't work, just make another one with harder metal. Doing the same thing over and over, that's definitely gonna give you better results. He claims that he wants to find true strength, but his journey is less about getting stronger and more about overcoming weakness, which is fine, but how is that gonna work if you just assume what your weaknesses are without actually looking into what's wrong with you? It's not gonna kill you to learn to be at least a little bit flexible. You see how I'm getting all of this from one edgy big sword? Well, that's semiotics, baby, the greatest thing in all of character design! Eleanor also has a pretty great design. I knew going in that she was gonna be a combination of the blind obedience and heel face turn tropes, especially with her primary colors being as blue as the curtain that people randomly feel like shaming others for wanting to look behind. Sorry for being a fan of media criticism. She's also really young at heart. During the first encounter with her, she cries because the weight of her job becomes too much for her, and Velvet ridicules her for crying because you'd think that an exorcist of her rank would be able to suppress their emotions. Not to mention that her choice of clothing and hairstyle does remind me of something I would expect a young child to look like, which makes even more sense when you learn that she's being used and manipulated by the Abbey and never once thought to question them, much like a young, impressionable child. It's one of those simple designs with clever execution, and it makes her character arc all the more riveting. But what really makes these characters, however, are the voice actors. Seriously, I still can't believe how perfect this English dub is. You can say whatever you want about English dubs in anime, games, or whatever, but in this game, Ray Chase voices the bad guy, so that means you're not legally allowed to criticize English dubs ever again. Many Tales games have consistently had English dubs that are just as good as the Japanese dub, if not better. God bless Wendy Lee for being the voice director of the series. I would argue that Berseria's English dub is the best one in the series, and Japan seems to agree with that sentiment as well, and they have heavy hitters like Rina Sato and Toshiyuki Morita. What? He was in the Lego Movie? The English dub does have familiar actors like Ben Diskin and Erica Mendes that do just as good of a job as you'd expect them to, if not better. But you also have a ton of other talented voice actors. Some of the minor named characters feature the likes of Darren DePaul, Max Middleman, and even Brina Palencia. Once again, they all sound as on point as the pencil that was used to write down their names on the cast list. Or lack thereof, because for some reason this series hates crediting their English voice actors properly. But the main cast, on the other hand, has voice actors that, from my experience at least, were either where they made their video game voicing debut, where they had to walk to run to other projects, or where they may have even found their best role. Amber Connor is the voice of Fee Tellis. Don't ask me why I'm calling him that. Apparently, this was her first and only major performance as a deuteragonist, and I fail to see why she isn't being casted in more works because she's kind of an amazing voice actor. Virtually everything she says as Fee Tellis brings a giddy smile to my face for one reason or all of them. I would love to see Amber voicing in more games. She really has some versatility. Martel knows that Erica Lindbeck has been receiving this treatment, but hey, it's well deserved. Some may have been introduced to her through Futaba in Persona 5, or even Cloud's #1 fan. She's great in all of those roles, but Magilu casually strolling her way to Cup of Tea Productions was what got Miss Lindbeck on the map. She even got to come back to the Tales series by the next game. Yeah! Magilu is one of those characters that is trying everything they can to annoy you 365 days in a row, but unintentionally failing because the voice acting is an 11 out of 10. I also love her bombast, I love her color palette, I love her subversive development, I love her abusive relationship with Bienfu, I love the fact that she supposedly wrote Alice in Wonderland and didn't know about its success, I love her skirt made out of books.
That's actually layer cake.
Okay then. But easily, the best performance in this game is Talia Sanjafi as Aizen. Fucking hell, man. This character is just generally godlike, and the voice acting makes me love him even more. There's just so much about him, such as his Reaper's Curse, his life experiences, his individuality, his love for his sister, his philosophies, his bromance with Rokuro, his OCD, and his days as a pirate. All of which are wonderfully handled by this amazing mohawk of a voice actor. At first glance, Aizen seems too serious, even as far as this game goes. I've even seen a few people say that Aizen is an edgy character. Do I even need to say why that's stupid? But the thing that this game does with its characters is that they flesh out a personality to develop quirks that feel natural. Aizen's philosophical nature allows him to act like a genuine mentor figure, specifically to Fee Tellis and to an extent Velvet. He's always giving helpful advice that encourages the party to keep moving forward, albeit at a cautious pace. But at the same time, his philosophies allow him to have some very strong opinions, even on trivial things like beetles. And when you realize how much he's learned in his long life, it makes even more sense as to why he feels so passionate about his opinions. Because not only does he have way more life experiences than the rest of the party, but even some of the antagonists as well. And Jaffe is better at selling this idea than amateur YouTubers are with trying to sell their channel on Google Ads. Especially when you start paying attention to the tone and smoothness of his voice.
I swore to myself I'd always do whatever I could to protect her. Wherever we went, she was in danger. Demons attacked us. A dragon tried to kidnap her.
A man whose shoulder she cries on.
Damnation, Magilu! My sister doesn't have any guy clinging onto her! Do you know something I don't? Prove it! Bring him here right now!
And I can't believe I'm saying this, but he actually does this better than the Toshiyuki Morikawa. How has this man never been nominated for any voice acting awards? And why is he not doing more? It's not even just because of this game. My mans can go from voicing Jimmy Blanca to Barry Allen to Aswell to Aizen like it's nobody's business. Normally I don't butt in with pirates, but in this case I wouldn't mind being blessed with suck. Now, I don't care about the whole sub versus dub debate since it boils down to who's better at talking, which is a moot point since the dubs are literally speaking different languages with different dialects and accents. Okay, but the game has dual audio and the actors will forever be more important than the language they're dubbing in. No need to pretend that it's not the case. But Berseria's English dub was what really got me to fall in outspoken appreciation for these characters. And Jaffe's voice acting was what made Aizen my favorite character in the game. He's not the only character that's gotten a lot of love in this game. Just take a look at what they did to my other main, Zavid, the only good character in Systeria. I'm just kidding, Dezel was actually a pretty great character. I wish we got to see more of him, but for once I understand why. Also, I guess that Edna was alright, if that's what you really want to hear. I mean, when has Rena-chan ever done anything wrong? This may seem like I'm getting distracted, and trust me, I'm something of a mentally ill person myself. But it's important to remember that Berseria is a prequel to Zestiria, and one of the game's best strengths is how it makes Zestiria's world not just better than that game, but more interesting in how it recontextualizes Zestiria. I won't go into too much detail on that since there's already a video that does this for me, but I can at least talk about how they made Zaveid more interesting since I haven't seen too many videos on him. Regardless of whether you're like me and you hate the game, or you're like, not me, and you love the game, people usually agree that Zaveid was the best character in Zestiria. But Zaveid was taken in a really interesting direction in Berseria. He wasn't just brought back because of fan service, but because it makes sense for him to be here. He's the second oldest character in Zestiria behind Lila. The rest of the cast is either too young to talk or hasn't even been born yet. And I think it's safe to assume that Lila's still in her slumber at this point. As far as how they utilize Zaveid, I remember seeing this one YouTube comment that said Zaveid has the personality and ideology of a typical anime protagonist. I'm not sure if I agree with personality since he's still as flirtatious as ever, but ideology? Yeah, I can totally agree with that. Despite his chattish demeanor, he believes that death is a terrible thing, which is in direct contrast to most of Berseria's cast, especially Aizen. And I also love how they focused on their relationship because Zestiria hinted at the two being really close. So it's great to see that his budding friendship and blatant duality with Aizen got as much attention as it did. They're fighting for the same cause, but they have different perspectives on it, and this prevents them from working with one another. Zaveid believes that people should be kept close at all times, while Aizen was forced to learn that sometimes it's better to let people go. In other words, Zaveid believes that birds have to fly so that they can keep living, while Aizen has a more nuanced understanding of why birds fly. Their development is resolved in a post-game side quest, which is a shame, even if it's a fantastic side quest, but it's worth noting that Zaveid's entire character still manages to avoid the struggles that lots of other prequels have when it comes to bringing back familiar characters. Sometimes, you have to write them differently and give them a development that elaborates on how they became the person we all knew them as. But at the same time, you need to be as faithful to the character's established persona as possible. It's one hell of a paradox, but Zaveid makes it work because one of the rare glittering gold moments in Zestiria is how he always challenged Sorei's viewpoints. Sorei believes that death is terrible and that no one should have to die if they don't need to. But according to Zaveid's own words,
death is a kind of salvation. For some.
But back in Berseria, he kinda acts like a flirtatious version of Sorei, thereby attempting to challenge the ideologies of the characters in Berseria. He doesn't change their ideologies, but he does grow to understand them, which is a natural inverse of his role in Zestiria. Instead of being a character that ruins his previous personality, he's written in a way where you get to enjoy him no matter what game you play. You either get a solid foil to the party or a fascinating character that is naturally developed over the course of both games. Don't let this distract you from the fact that Zestiria is still Garbo.
Mickey boy, when a man says he means business, he means business.
Don't ever forget that!
Bad dialogue aside, I would also like to mention that Ian Sinclair is another underrated voice actor. He's basically Patrick Seitz 2.0, but being considered inferior to Jesus is still being compared to Jesus. It's also funny how some of his best characters have had something to do with wind. Ian has voiced Zaveid the Whirlwind, Rashid of the Turbulent Wind, Whis, which sounds like a noise that wind would make, and Gordeau, who spams Grim Reaper's Fast of the Wind! But we do have one more character that we haven't talked about. There's been a lot of hate for this character in the past, and given how I haven't been giving a lot of attention to her, you might assume that I consider her one of the game's weakest aspects. Clearly, you're not familiar with my videos, but if you are, then you saw this coming. I have talked about Velvet in my edgy characters video, and I think I did a pretty good job there. Though one thing that I wish I could have elaborated on was the main reasons people disliked Velvet. It wasn't because they didn't understand why she was the way she is, but because she was that way at all. Plus, there were people that disliked her outfit for how exaggerated it looked on the surface, which I completely forgot about in the video, and in hindsight, that was the biggest problem that people have with Velvet, yet I didn't even mention it once. I knew that I was missing something. Ugh! Editing videos is so hard! People who edit their own videos deserve more credit and respect! In my defense, however, I feel that addressing these arguments would eventually lead to subjectivity. And who am I to downplay that? I'm especially not one to say that Velvet being a victim of trauma means that she's devoid of any criticism, and I hope that nobody considers manipulating people like this. Though I still stand that it is important to acknowledge context before criticizing. With this in mind, I might as well go over it here. I know that hearing some white man talk about the way a woman dresses themselves is usually callous, but I think that I can at least encourage a better conversation since I've studied various works under feminist theory, and unlike the average YouTubing fraud, I know what the male gaze is. And yes, it is a real term. Visual pleasure theory is so underexplored on YouTube, I swear. The male gaze is when the camera focuses on a woman's shapely assets, usually through a zoom in or a close-up. It's basically a less laborious way of saying boob and butt posing. There's nothing wrong with these shots on paper. In fact, when handled with care, they can be just as empowering as any other dynamic shot of a man. But it's also really easy to tell when the cameraman's getting a little too carefree. And it's just as easy to take the male gaze out of context and undermine games just because a character's not sitting with confidence. Which thankfully Velvet is, but I digress. I'm all for bringing feminism into gaming, but there's a difference between saying a point and actually having a point. You might as well radiate the same energy as those morons who defend f***ery that shall not be named with,
Take it easy, it's just a drawing.
which is the stupidest argument to make in the history of stupid arguments to make. Artists express themselves through art, and every single one of them includes what they think and what they believe, and the ones who don't only add it because it's what they think people want, because they think it's the best demographic to target. Why are these soulless demographics better at thinking than you? I really need to shut up, I'm sorry. To add some perspective, I asked people about Berseria's character designs in a community post. I didn't get too many replies, but I definitely did get some insightful ones, like, holy goodness, Usman, the GOAT! As I expected, Velvet's was one of the least popular. It isn't even the first comment I've gotten talking about her design. Hell, people have been complaining about her choice of clothing for quite a while now. I'm normally not one to criticize people for disliking a woman's costume, except for the one time where I did. Okay, real talk, I'm genuinely sorry about that. I should have gone about it a different way. But I also hate seeing bad faith arguments. And I'm getting sick of people, especially those who call themselves media theorists, take a single look at a JPEG of someone like Lara Croft, Bayonetta, or Taki, and immediately assume that video games are normalizing sexualization entirely off of those select few designs. I mean, seriously? No talk about the character designers? No insight about the stories of these games? No discussion about the setting of these games? No conversations about the cultural differences of American and Japanese games? Not even a single sentence about the actual characters or their personalities? Well, I guess I'm sorry for expecting these theorists to do bare minimum research on the gaming industry. That being said, I also believe that there are better ways of providing arguments against these points than not doing it at all. Some people will make entire video essays over a random Twitter user who wasn't even being toxic about their opinions. Why do I still use this app again? In-game context is important, sure, but it can only go so far when talking about topics like sexualization. We could talk about these JPEGs another day, but for now, let's focus on the one that has Velvet on it. And let's make it a PNG, because unlike these people, we actually know what we're talking about. There we go. Berseria's characters were designed by longtime Tales character designer Mutsumi Inomata. She's also worked on a slew of art and animation in the past, going as far back as the 80s, believe it or not. And she's even been able to inspire other artists and animators such as Atsuko Ishida. Though she was requested to make Velvet look as attractive as possible, remember that attractive doesn't have to mean sexy. Why yes, this is a defense used by weirdos, but in this case it's valid to use because Inomata is not not known for drawing women in skimpy attire. She's dabbled in designs like these, with Mila in particular being used as a base for Velvet's design. But if anything, she's best known for drawing girls in poofy dresses. And many of these female character designs look conventionally attractive without coming across as sexual. And there are even some of these designs in Berseria itself. In fact, they actually hold back on the male gaze quite a bit. I mean, it still happens on occasion, and the other characters do point out her odd choice of clothing a few times in skits. Fan service is just kind of inevitable in JRPGs. But in terms of camera work, it's often focusing on Velvet's martial arts skills and her agility rather than a specific part of her body. This is something that actually stays very consistent with Inomata's animations. Most of her character designs have a big floaty set piece that is able to look really flashy in animations. In Velvet's case, she has her big mane of hair and a long black coat, both of which are the most accentuated parts of her animations in not just gameplay, but in the cutscenes as well. And it makes them look even more appealing than they already do. And when they do focus on a part of her body, it's almost always her face, being the source of where her emotions are best expressed. Which makes sense given that her emotions are integral to the story and her development. Plus, the male gaze in Berseria isn't nearly as prevalent as another JRPG released in 2017. Man, I really am forced to make a video on this game, and I don't think I'm ready for it. Though, especially with the skits joking about her outfit, this doesn't rule out the possibility that it may serve no purpose in the story. There are certainly other female character designs that do have this issue, but Velvet is not one of them. And this is where we get into the story. In terms of her outfit, it is just some rags that she finds in a chest, but you'd be surprised as to how wonderfully they work symbolically. The colors establish her as the Lord of Calamity, and the tattered rags represent how far she's fallen into a downward spiral. Plus, when you've been locked away in a prison for 3 years with nothing to eat but demons, it's kinda hard to find clothing options. Though one does have to ask why she wouldn't just get a better outfit, or at least patch it up when she gets out of the prison. At first, it's because she simply doesn't care. Her goals don't give her much time to think about what to wear. The second act also leads the player to believe that this is all she thinks she deserves. She does care at this point, but in a way where it gets to her emotions and think that there's no room for redemption. This leads us to the third and final act where she embraces her title as the Tattered Lord of Calamity. Admittedly, I do think that this would be a good time to at least patch up the uniform since it's not like she'd be losing her identity. But then again, before Mount Killerhouse, she still thinks that redemption is not possible for her, so fair enough. Then again, her clothing actually looks really good patched up. Shame she doesn't take care of her outfit or her hair. Of course, there are the arguments that the costume is still impractical regardless. Now, this is something I can somewhat agree with. She does leave her stomach and, to an extent, her thighs fairly exposed. Maybe that's why she always crouches in her running speed and fighting style. But at the same time, it's imperative to remember that she doesn't just attack with a Therian Claw. In fact, she doesn't even use it as much as people think. Her fighting style primarily consists of a retractable short sword and blades on her boots. So the gauntlets and greaves are meant to prevent any unnecessary damage from how often she uses them. If you still think that the outfit is exaggerated, that's fair, but given how the design was made by a female character designer who likely had a passion for the character and the story she came from, could you really call Velvet's design problematic? And given that Velvet's character arc and personality are very obviously more than the clothes she wears, as I'll get to in a bit, wouldn't this design come across as empowerment rather than sexualization or fetishization? I'm not responsible enough to give a definitive answer, and given how a decently large amount of Tales fans are women, I'm more interested in hearing what they have to say on the matter. But if the context allows room for it, I do think that these questions should be asked before making such bold accusations of the game designers being sexist pigs. All I'm trying to do here is encourage more in-depth conversations, as I believe that there are better arguments that people could and should be making. No need to simplify words when words aren't meant to be simple. The least you could do is understand that it wasn't made with any piggish thoughts in mind. That's where the visual pleasure theory starts to hold its weight. Though I feel that I'd still love Velvet as a character even if she had a legitimately ugly mug. That's more than you can say for the animation fandom at least. In terms of her personality, her flaws don't stem from the fact that she wants revenge, but the way she goes about it. She's still not this edgy, emotionalist, badass whammon that shows no remorse. There are plenty of nuances that make her out to be much more than that. I'm not not talking about the prologue section. That's obviously a big part of it, and it immediately helps you see Velvet as more than how she is on a surface level. But there are more nuances throughout the game. By experiencing Velvet's nightmares, we understand that sometimes she's acting out of fear. By sparing lives of other Therians like Kamoana, Medissa, and the like, we know that she has a soft spot for children and caretakers. By seeing how she ignored the illusions in a ball and softened the tone of her voice, we see that she still thinks highly of her home and would have loved to go back to it even if it's destroyed. By seeing her break down after learning the error of her ways, we can see that her humanity isn't as lost as she thought it was. After that scene in the Earth Pulse point, she starts to simmer down her hatred and despair. You see it in many subtle ways throughout the game. This is what the Tales series excels at, regularly communicating character development outside of the main story. Vesperia does it through group victory quotes, Exilia does it through battle music, Abyss does it through... yes, and Berseria does it through smaller but equally meaningful ways such as voice acting and even skit expressions. But I'll talk about the former in a bit. Let me go over how Fie Tellus plays into Velvet's character arc. So anyway, Fie Tellus is something of a spirit of her unborn nephew who also has a resemblance to Velvet's little brother. There were people who thought it was weird how Fie Tellus and Velvet show off a sort of affection for each other, because I guess the phrase, "you're like a brother to me," doesn't exist to those people. Stop assuming that every form of love is exclusively romantic and or sexual. My very existence debunks that rhetoric on its own. Even outside of that, the game literally has skits dedicated to Velvet's motherly attributes and how overprotective she becomes of Fie Tellus. How do you people miss this kind of stuff? Do you just not play the game? A lot happens between them. Out of context, this scene where Velvet nearly chokes Fie Tellus to death would debunk everything I said and make Velvet out to be a terribly written character, especially since Velvet has done a little bit of controlling herself. It's clearly in the form of protection rather than manipulation, so Velvet probably didn't notice it at first, but other characters certainly caught onto it, including Fie Tellus himself, who had to call Velvet out on her hypocritically overbearing behavior, arguably more than anyone else. This isn't to say he's used as a tool to enhance Velvet's character arc. He has his own arc related to themes such as identity and what it means to be alive, and it's a phenomenal arc. But guess who's the primary enabler of that arc? Aizen, if we want to be technical. We stand Taliesin Jaffe, but Velvet is just as influential to him. Though she didn't always treat him the best, she still tried everything she could to protect him and lead him on the right path. She gave him a name when he was a number. But this name wanted to be his own man, which he only discovered the desire for such a name because of the influence that Velvet had on him while he was a number. That's incredible. I also really liked how the other character arcs are explicitly paused until around the time when Velvet has her second act low point. I don't know if this was intentional or an oversight. I guess that's up for you to debate in the comments. But I found that to be a nice touch because of how selfish and apathetic Velvet was throughout the first two acts. But who could possibly voice such a selfish character? Naturally, a character of this caliber would only be voiced by the most fitting person imaginable. Someone who has a natural talent for voicing such low-pitched, badass characters. Someone who can normalize an aggressive behavior and deliver a wide array of emotions at once. Someone like Cristina Valenzuela. What? Fucking Shantae? Noelle Vermillion? That's Christina V? I'm pretty sure that she's had to lower her pitch to voice a character, but if it was to this degree. And I think it speaks volumes when BehindTheVoiceActors.com considers the main character of an overshadowed JRPG to be one of the best roles of this iconic and beloved voice actress. It's astounding how many emotions she conveys in her lines while getting all of them right. Yeah, sometimes she gets a little deadpan in some of the quieter moments of the game, but as far as I'm concerned, that's usually how characters like Velvet are voiced. And when she brings it with those emotions, she arrives home with a box of flower-shaped chocolates. Darkened raspberry chocolates to be exact, as those are the best ones. Not to mention that when she relaxes in the third act of the game, you feel like she's become a better person. I don't mean that you only feel it in the storytelling or the character's development. All of it is conveyed in the voice acting. She still maintains her sass and such, but Tales games usually convey development through dialogue or battle music, both of which are great techniques, but Velvet's development is shown almost entirely through Christina's talents. I might even go as far as to say that this is one of, if not the best, video game voice performances of 2017, if not in all of JRPGs. I'm putting her up there with Ray f***ing Chase's Noctis for more reasons than one. This performance is nothing less than Oscar-worthy. Okay. Now, I know that I have been praising this game to no end, but I am aware that there are people in this world that don't like this game, as that's a perfectly valid sentiment to have, and I would never want to take that away from anyone, nor will I ignore the flaws that have and will turn people away from this game. Most of the dungeons are pretty bad, the run speed without a geoboard is a little slow for my liking, I'm not a fan of the equipment enhancing mechanic, I really don't like hunting the dire foes, the game is really easy outside of chaos and intense difficulties, and skits being used as story progression is not only a blatant issue of time constraints, but it actually hurts the pacing way more than you would think, especially if you're used to skits being optional, which this game also has optional skits, so make of that what you will. Then again, if you're gonna take the time to analyze every single frame and line of dialogue of a 60-hour game, you're guaranteed to come across something eyebrow-raising. I even grew like 6 more pairs just to compensate for what I could find in this game alone. A few weak line deliveries here and there, as well as a couple of lines that almost reach Ann Takamaki levels of being on the nose. Plus, as visually sublime and well-directed as the game's cutscenes are, there are a few uncanny oddities. The English dub has a handful of audio cutoffs, a few janky animations with one of them having a character literally T-posing on the ground, and a single instance of forgetting to add English voice clips and leaving in the Japanese audio. Times like these are why most games have a day 1 patch, kiddos. Not to mention that the story, on a surface level, may not be very engaging with the skits issue mentioned earlier and some padding in the first act. As you can see, even the best games have multiple flaws. I feel that the more you play a game, the more you start to realize that its pros and cons are just as prominent as each other. And at that point, all that matters is which side you're willing to focus on more. For me, I admire this game for what it does, but I can't deny that it means people are not going to fall in outspoken appreciation for this game like I did. You can understand this by looking at Velvet's design alone. I still stand that it's a great design that checks off all of the boxes it needs to and then some, and I will continue to express this. But like, how the hell are you supposed to know all of that at a single glance without having extensive knowledge of the game's narrative beyond the service level? But with that said, there are people like me who do look past the surface level, and the story is what established Tales of Berseria as my favorite game of 2017. In order to find out why birds fly, we need to look at what they do when they fly. This cast of characters is probably the most outlandish party of 6 in the Tales series. We have this era's Lord of Calamity, a morally complex samurai, a cursed pirate who's adamant about what he believes in, and a witch who never gives a fuck about anything. While there are good-hearted party members like Laphicet and Eleanor, they're being swayed by the people who are perceived as bad in the game's world. As mundane as Zestiria was, it still gave us a clear distinction between who's supposed to be good and evil. But in Berseria, the tables have turned so much that video game Donkey got diagnosed with PTSD from all this turning. You can't say that these guys are good people, but they're not villains. And while Artorias is the shepherd, who is ideally supposed to be the hero of the world, his goals are to rid the world of emotions and build a new utopia. Maybe not one where he specifically rules above it all, but one that is at least rid of the malevolence. But the thing is, this malevolence is everywhere. It's always dwelling within humans. Some embrace the malevolence and become a monster, some avoid it in any way they can, and some are forced to succumb to it. Contrary to what the people in this game think, there is no such thing as true evil or true heroism. There's just evil existing with what we think is good. Artorias rose the ranks to become the shepherd and and reform the entire planet, even going as far as to lie to the people and make up a pretend disease. This is what makes Berseria stand out among other video game stories. It's not so much that we get to experience the bad guy's perspective, or even stories about utopias. It's because we're experiencing the story of a person who happens to be portrayed as bad. And this other person is not trying to create a utopia. He's trying to create a reformation of religion. And yep, this is the part where I bring up the big controversial R word that in some contexts is worse than the actually controversial R word. But I'm outspoken. I'm not going to try to pretend that I'm not. But like, when it comes to topics like this, I also understand when I need to take myself down a peg. So I am not trying to say that my view of religion is objectively correct, nor am I trying to say that you're wrong for disagreeing with me on religion. This is just my take on religion. If you don't want to hear it, then skip to this timestamp. Anyways, back to video. Out of all the great story beats that I could be talking about, why would I ever pick one of the most controversial talking points of any conversation? This game's story has a lot to talk about as is. I could gush about the other amazing antagonists, Rokuro's journey of finding true strength, the importance of Velvet's comb, pretty much any scene with Lady Teresa, or why Magilu is the way that she is. All of these contribute to what makes this game so fantastic, but they would not be enough for a video of this scale. I mean, sure, you can say that a game is good or even a masterpiece, but if you only give surface level reasons that lots of other games are also good at, who cares? You need to look beyond the surface level if you want to talk about a game as the subject of a video essay. And yes, I'm finally using that term for one of my videos this time. I think it's safe to say that I've talked plenty about what makes this game good, so I had to boil it down to the story and what makes this game special, because it's the special aspects that deserve to be talked about. And for this game's case, I do believe that religion had to be one of them. Just ask yourselves this: how many times have you seen a non-Christian work of fiction have religion nearly principal to its themes and messages? It's nothing new in general media where religious themes are often portrayed in the form of a cult, a manipulative priest, or something to poke fun at. But video games don't do this very much. Aside from games that are literally about Christianity, religious themes are usually avoided. At best, they're used as a mere reference for characters or enemies, and that's the most religious that games are willing to get. But there are games that at least try to make it more prominent. The Castlevania series has always had religion at least as a motif. And while the canon religion of the Belmonts is debatable, it's one of the only video game series that can be used as a religious parable. However, I do know that Final Fantasy IV has a high prominence on religious themes. You see the priest praying a few times, including a prayer to guide Cecil on his path to his paladin transformation, which also ties into the game's theme of redemption quite naturally, and you don't have to be religious to admire it. But that game portrays religion in a positive light, which isn't a bad thing at all. But what if I wanted something darker, or a game that has less positive conversations about religion? The Binding of Isaac is directly based around religion, specifically taking inspiration from the story with Abraham believing that God wants to sacrifice his son. The Binding of Isaac is clearly trying to say that this story is up. This game has frequently been accused of being anti-Christian, but that's not at all what the game is about. It's meant to represent what it feels like being a kid growing up in a conservative Christian household, on top of going through other things such as abuse and even a divorce. And Isaac's imagination is meant to portray how a child views the world with all of this in mind. It's definitely an extreme take, but at no point does the game directly criticize Christianity as a whole, nor does it outright say that religion is bad. I mean, if one of the game's endings is literally Isaac using the Bible to stop his mother from abusing him, then it's pretty obvious that this game does not have an adamant hatred of Christianity. It's just not afraid to call out extreme Christians. But what if I wanted a game that tackles religion in a way that could be applied to other religions as well as Christianity? What if it challenged my religious viewpoints in other ways? This is where Tales of Berseria's religious commentary comes into play. Now, I do need to point out that this technically isn't the first time that the Tales series has touched upon religion, as Tales of Symphonia also had great uses of religious pilgrimages in its story. But I find Berseria's commentary to be just as good, if not better. I think it's safe to say that Berseria's use of religion is more than just a simple cult, since Berseria is displaying it as something on a global scale. And there are even talks of banning other religions. Lest we forget that the Shepherd versus the Lord of Calamity, a concept that is integral to the game's world building, has some obvious symbolism. Although you could argue that Artorias is akin to a manipulative priest, since technically that's what he's supposed to be, I would like to point out that he had followers beforehand that he treated with love and respect. He's not holding people hostage for safety, and from what the game shows us, Artorias only influenced people who were willing to follow him of their own volition. Still, it's a part of his plan to rid the world of emotion. And now this is where the topic of religion begins. I swear the timestamp is right there. Last chance to flee! Still here? Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so just to get this out of the way, I am a Christian myself, non-denominational Protestant if you care about the specifics. I feel like I've been pretty happy with this life. Not to say that I've never had struggles with God, because I have yet to meet a single Christian who hasn't struggled with him, but as of right now, I'm content with my faith, and I fail to see why I should change that anytime soon. However, not only do I understand that religion isn't for everyone, but there are plenty of valid reasons for criticizing Christianity as a whole. With that said, let me say that I hate the idea of forcefully converting someone to Christianity. Not only is it harmful, hypocritical, and seldom successful, but if you really think about it, it's not at all what God wanted. Yeah, he ultimately wants people to accept him into their hearts, but on their own volition. I guess this goes into the separate jar of demons as to whether or not God truly allows free will. But I do know that when you force people to think and believe your subjective view of the Bible, you end up following the same practices as those stuffy priests that actively went against Jesus. Now, I'm not here to say that I know more about an omnipotent God than the literal God that lets me continue to exist, and I suggest that other people should stop claiming that as well. But I can understand what Berseria is trying to say. Not that religion is bad, but there are extreme religious hypocrites that turn religion into something much worse. In other words, false prophets. False prophets may sound like a term specific to a few people, but false prophets can literally be anyone. To focus the example on Christianity, people have their own interpretation of the religion. Why else do you think there are so many divisions of Christianity? And regardless of whether they're positive or negative, it becomes a real problem if their interpretation is shoved down everyone's throats. It doesn't even have to be direct. Some Christians are much more subtle and charismatic about it. Take it from me that no matter who or what you are, being religious doesn't mean you know better than most. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? Besides, in my case, I believe that God created a world too complex for a mere human to understand. And no, this is not my means of debunking science. If anything, I'm saying the exact opposite because I believe that God created the world through evolution. I mean, come on! This is the same guy who meticulously constructed an entire universe, possibly multiverse, with rules and particles, merely by speaking it into existence within a few days. Is it really that hard to believe that he would give his creations the ability to evolve? Especially since he technically instructed them to do so? I mean, if he made man in his own image, wouldn't they be able to adapt to their surroundings by default? But I'm going a little too far about this. Despite this, there are people that deny such things such as evolution because they've convinced themselves that simply believing in the word of their religion makes them understand exactly how the world works. Berseria brings a keen attention to false prophets like that. False prophets are always claiming that they have a special connection with God, Allah, or whoever their deity is. Or at least they have a bold proposal that they believe will fix the entire world. They use this rhetoric to climb the ladder of power and attempt to shape their community in their image and act like it's for the greater good. I guess you could say that these people are a fan of utilitarianism. I don't want to act like a pompous Scotsman or anything, but I do know that there are better ways of representing your religion. Ideally, a good priest or pastor is supposed to use the religion as a means of helping people cope with the pain in their lives, not force an opinion onto others and tell them how to think. It's really sad how rampant false prophets are in this civilization and how they claim to possess this true image of God. Need I remind you that the United States just had a false prophet as president not that long ago? He even changed his religion as a means of gaining support and taking advantage of evangelicals with his charisma. Hell, even I fell victim to it at first. So this kind of thing can and will work if a person is vulnerable enough. People like this are the biggest reason why some people despise religion as much as they do. Why do you think so many atheists are people who were born in religious families? I'm absolutely stretching my arms to reach for this next point, but I feel like religion wouldn't be this taboo of a casual talking point if some Christians weren't so toxic and manipulative. If you happen to be someone that acts like the behaviors that I mentioned earlier, and if you believe that God does allow free will, why would you not see a problem in practices like forceful conversion and charismatic manipulation? These practices not only rid people of their free will, but they also rid them of their emotions. And there are those false prophets that believe that emotion is the root of all evil. Now let's take another look at Artorias. Being the shepherd, most people follow him and his bold plans. Removing evil from the world is a dream for many, sure, but that doesn't make it a practical thing to do. It also walks into a gray area of what evil is in this context, but I'm not responsible enough to dive into that issue right now. People are willing to overlook whatever dirty deeds he's done or is doing because they believe that he's a good person deep down. But you know me and how I love to sanitize the ground before standing on it for a good-ass speech. In case I haven't made that abundantly clear, I've never liked saying that someone is a good person deep down, certainly not as a means to justify their callous actions. I'm all for giving people an opportunity to change, and hey, who doesn't love a good comeback story? But I feel like if you give someone 20 chances and they royally up 30 times, then I think it's safe to say that they're not a good person deep down. If anything, people are usually much worse deep down. At least from my experiences anyway. But the depressing thing is, nobody is born into becoming a bad person. It's either a personal choice or something that they unknowingly morph themselves into. As much as it may suck, Artorias did both. I have heard people say that Artorias was being used as Melchior's puppet, and in the context of what I'm trying to say, I agree that Melchior is something of a false prophet himself. But I think that Artorias still had an opportunity to disagree with him. Even though Artorias changed for the worse, he never stopped believing in his late master's philosophies. It's just that his shifted emotions and mindset following the death of Celica and their unborn child skewed the meanings of them all. Plus, Artorias is the one calling the shots. He's the one preaching these philosophies. Even if Melchior inspired him to maintain these beliefs at first, he still follows Artorias' orders. The most he could have done was tell him how to go through with it all. No matter who influenced whom, Artorias' actions were clearly of his own volition. And given how many Christians have such volatile interpretations of the Bible to a point where there are dozens of divisions of Christianity, some of which actively compete with each other even today, along with how they all search for extremely elaborate meanings in the Bible regardless of whether or not that underlying meaning is true, much like how Artorias found his own interpretation of his late master's philosophies, I just can't believe I didn't notice this in my first playthrough of the game. Yet this isn't the most integral theme of the game. Just because we know what birds do when they fly, doesn't mean we know why they fly. At last, we get to that notorious question that the game has been haunting us with since the beginning. At first, it may be obvious why birds fly. The game gives multiple answers, all of which are technically correct, but not quite what the game is looking for. To find the real answer, it's important to ask what the game is about. A lot of people say that the game is about emotion versus reason, but I don't think it's in the way that people think. I'd argue that they are smaller symbols to what I consider to be the most prominent theme of the game, extremism. While extremism does boil down to things like religion, politics, and ideologies, which Berseria certainly covers in its main story, the extremism that it primarily focuses on is more psychological. Based on what the game shows us, extreme levels of emotion can turn you into a demon. This ranges from a surplus of hate in your heart or violent bursts of emotion. Extreme levels of reason can turn you into a shell, taking away your compassion, care, love, and all other emotions. But no matter which side extremism pulls you in, it will inevitably steal your humanity. Extremists can affiliate themselves with any belief, but they all share reoccurring habits, such as manipulation and victimization. Tactics like this are abused by extremists because they insist other people believe what they believe. Whenever you attempt to compromise their beliefs, they'll respond with their victim card and maybe manipulate you into siding with them. And if you don't follow their extremism, then they act as if you betrayed them. Let's look at the dynamic between our protagonist and antagonist. What better way to represent extremism than a Lord of Calamity and a false prophet titled the Shepherd? I guess there's not much to want if the Shepherd is also a Lord, but there's still more context than that. Velvet is so wrapped up in getting revenge on Artorias that she completely ignores all reason to do so. During her revenge plot, she gathers a plethora of demons and Malachim to take him down. Sometimes she didn't have to try very hard, and sometimes she had to literally beat the senses into characters into thinking she's doing the right thing. Despite what he convinces other people, Artorias isn't safe from extreme emotions either. He may not show it, but I feel like he's emotional himself. I mean, his plans stem from the belief that emotion is the root of all evil, and he backs this up with his own experiences. Remember that sin is manifested in the form of malevolence. Artorias chose to suppress himself from showing any emotion. As a leader or leading figure, there's this constant pressure of being the role model. When the balance between leadership and relatability is rickety, some people choose to fully embrace one of the sides. But at some point, one would have to ask which is better, expressing themselves and bringing out the best in them at a cost of sometimes lashing out at other people, or constantly living life as a silent, stern, sad boy that doesn't want to talk to anyone or care about anything. Artorias never had to ask himself this question, and it brought out the worst in him. He even willingly betrayed Velvet just to accomplish his goals, not feeling any remorse until after he dies in the final battle, where Velvet shows him the error of his ways. To go on another minor tangent, there was only one infamous moment of overseas censorship, and it was in the beginning of the game where Laphicet dies. This censorship does actually kinda hinder the intended callback during the final battle, but at the same time, it's not like there's nothing to gain from it. The theme of extremism is shown with our protagonist and antagonist in how they believe that they need to erase what they consider evil. I like to think that Eleanor's journey is a good example of how this extremism can impact other people. She was being used by the Abbey, who likely played to her backstory and desired to protect as many people as possible. This is what the Abbey claimed to stand for, after all. But later on, she sided with Velvet after learning about the Abbey's hypocrisy. It's not even an easy thing for her. Eleanor is always being viewed as a traitor by Artorias and his legates. Not even just an enemy, a traitor. While she does stick with Velvet throughout the end of the game and ends up fighting against the Abbey by her own choice, remember that she's initially forced into joining her. She does question Velvet's motivations as well, and Velvet does not have any of it. During some of their interactions, she constantly reminds the player that she wants revenge on Artorias for killing her brother. Wait, the player? Am I saying that this game is being on the nose with its themes? Good guess, but actually no. I remember hearing that the vast majority of people were hooked on the game making you play from the bad guy's perspective. I think it's safe to say that those people would relate to Velvet's turmoil, or at least they were willing to continue the game to support her revenge plot. If that's true, then Velvet was manipulating you! Yes, you fell for extremist ideologies, you fool! You let her murder so many people just because she's the protagonist! And now that the game is telling you that she's evil, why would you continue to root for Velvet knowing what she's done? That is because you learned the real reason she's flying to stop Artorias. It is at this point where the game had to slap you upside the head to remind you that Velvet isn't that much of a good person. In fact, in some ways, she's very similar to Artorias, even going as far as to abandon their lives following traumatic events, which leads them down a path where they ruin the lives of other people just for their own personal goals. But the game also tells you why she's better than him. There were phantoms that pushed her to a point of no return, but there were multiple moments where she came across as the kind-hearted girl from her village, kidnapping and sparing not just Vitalis and the Therians, but the rest of the party as well. I mean, really think about it. Aside from Rokuro, who was indebted to her, all of the other party members were actively holding her back to a point where she had every right to abandon them, if not kill them. She was well aware of Eleanor being a spy, Magilu was always doing her own thing and calling out Velvet's hypocrisy, and Aizen has literally been a curse. Especially when you take into account how his personal affairs involving Zavid have gotten in her way a couple of times. So why did Velvet let them stick around? Well, that is because most of them served a later purpose to her journey, but she's worked with more reliable mercenaries and gangs, so why these people specifically? Remember when I just mentioned Rokuro was indebted to her? This debt is really just Rokuro's mean of saying that Velvet inspires him, and the rest of the party feels the same way. They've also been very inconvenienced by virtue of being on the same side as the Lord of Calamity. But this is where we start snapping people's heads back to reality. If this were Artorias, he actually would ditch them, if not kill them. I mean, he basically exiled Eleanor and even Lady Teresa, and he knew that Shigure wanted to betray him at some point, and he just didn't care. But Velvet reached a point where she was able to respect their selfish desires, helping Aizen find his long-lost captain, assisting Rokuro in taking down his brother, helping Eleanor learn the better ways to go about helping the world, and guiding Vitalis into finding his identity. This isn't to say that Velvet is redeemed, as she still committed acts of arson, murdered hundreds of people, and caused the world to go into chaos. Utilitarianism is flawed, but doing the opposite doesn't automatically mean that you're doing what's morally just. However, the difference between Velvet and Artorias is that, unlike Arthur, Velvet was truly alive this whole time. She doesn't let go of her hatred, but after being so stubborn, she finally remembers those days in familial warmth, she says. She still goes through with killing him, but no longer out of revenge, but to stop his extremism and to say goodbye to Arthur one last time. For the longest time, even he thought he was dead. But Velvet was able to reach out to him once more. I swear, those tears falling down on his head. Every time, man. Every time. Then comes the ending of the game, which does have some odd out-of-context moments, but what is most admirable is that she was willing to sacrifice herself to restore free will to the people and give everyone a second chance. But why though? Why would she want any of this? Artorias murdered her little brother, neglected their village when everyone became a demon, cut off her arm, which turned her into a demon, and left her to rot in a prison for 3 years. Oh, and it's implied that he also stabbed her through the head, as a test, no less. Not to mention that she was reviled and antagonized by the entire world. For justifiable reasons, sure, but also because the Abbey basically told them to start assuming that Velvet was bad with no redeeming qualities. But through it all, she still loved the world and the people in it. Not just Laphicet, but Arthur too. She loved them so much that she had to save them from this extremism. It may have been fruitless since some people are just that bad, but while Artorias' desires to save the world drove him to villainy, Velvet's love for her family and memories of her home eventually overcame the more logical approach of hating them. Just like a true hero. All of this because the characters elaborate on a scene or a theme. You know what some of us English majors like to call this? Explicit exposition. I even made a video that covers this to an extent. This is one of the most brilliant uses of explicit exposition I've ever seen. Even though the game is telling the player how to feel at points, not only are they during a high point in the story, but it still gives the player time and space to consider what's currently happening and reevaluate the story up to this point. Even if it sounds like the game is being on the nose, there's a difference between giving context for a scene and giving the entire scene away because you don't trust the player that they know how to feel. Again, go watch the video in the corner card for more info on that. Either way, you can't overcome extremism until you've recognized what it is. And having Velvet find an answer to whether or not her quest was worth it, she's also used as a symbol to show Artorias the error of his ways. Velvet has learned the exact lesson that Artorias needed to learn. Going back to the ending, I understand that it's a mixed bag. I really do. But in other areas, I feel like people are ignoring Vitalis' speech at the end, as it perfectly captures the game's ultimate message. Everyone is good and evil. But in the midst of all of this evil in the world, it is never too late to start being good. No matter where we are in life, it is the goodness that makes us truly alive. This is what the Tales series excels at, exploring the duality of humanity. It's not just having the good guy and the bad guy act on different sides, there's also a duality between all of the characters. Eternia, Symphonia, and Exilia literally have their worlds split in two, and this creates an opportunity for discussions on different cultures, classes, and even races. Abyss has a plot twist related to Luke that elicits multiple conflicts between him and Ash. And finally, Berseria's duality is focused on the philosophies of the characters. Rokuro finds his true strength with a blade that is not just powerful but also flexible, one that allows him to master a combination of both Rangetsu sword styles. Aizen is a cursed angel of death who is willing to help guide his comrades on the right path no matter the potential consequences. Magilu is a broken woman who desires a fixed life without actually wanting it fixed. Artorias' legates have parallels with at least one of the party members. Be it Shigure considering fights a hobby instead of a proof of strength like Rokuro, or Melchior insisting on the world being controlled through a natural order, unlike what Aizen believes and what Magilu has grown to despise. Both Vitalis and Eleanor have their arcs developed by experiencing all of this, further proving that characters can work as tools while still being characters. Even after Velvet's character development in the third act of the game, the party remains selfish, but they're selfish for the right reasons. But does that make them good people? They're very clearly not the villains, but given their actions and philosophies, can you call them good people? No matter what side you take on this, good and evil are just as prominent as each other, and at that point, you can always try and be the best you can be. This is why Tales of Berseria was my favorite game of 2017. The game's message and how it goes about explaining it is bold and brilliant, though I will admit that it's not perfectly handled. As I said, the game has its points of padding and not every line works. The game is also trying to parallel the relationship between Teresa and Oscar with the relationship between Velvet and Laphicet, but I wouldn't exactly say that this is an apt comparison, though not for the reasons you think. Plus, this is one of those games where you need to learn to love or at least be okay with everything this game has to offer. But who do you think is making this video? This game came out in my last semester of high school. I was in a place where I just really wanted to leave home so badly, so it was nice to at least have a great game to pass the time, despite all the shit that I was going through during that time. But I never really realized how great this game was, nor how this game was just apparently so important to me. I've had this video in mind for about a couple of years now, but I decided to wait until now to upload it. Not just because it was difficult to pinpoint what resonated with me, and certainly not because of how long it took to edit this video, but because in May of 2022, I finally graduated college with 3 majors, so I felt like it would be fitting to end yet another era with Berseria. I'm not sure how many eras I'll even have left, but the only downside to learning more about the game is that I've also learned more about myself, I guess. In case you couldn't tell, I don't like to keep secrets from other people, so I have no reason to hide any of this. It's a pretty long twit longer. For now, let's just say that I was that guy in high school. You can feel free to pause if you really care about what I mean by that. I wasn't the worst person like this. I've never committed a felony, nor have I smoked weed in the middle of the hallways, for example. Yes, there were people who did that. But there were other things I did and said that other people practically got suspended, if not expelled for. Yet the worst I usually got was a slap on the wrist. Maybe. Nobody else felt the need to call me out on it. And the ones who did, I just never really listened to all that much. So I just assumed it was okay. But then a few things happened to me in college, and I accidentally looked back at myself a few years and I realized I was one fucked up individual. Not to mention that another thing made me realize that I've been gaslit, manipulated, verbally abused, and emotionally abused a lot more than I would have liked. None of this excuses my actions, and it never will. But it's because of those actions where I believed that I deserved it all. I mean, it wasn't too far from how I was raised to think anyways. And that's honestly pitiful, because we all want to look at ourselves as someone who always does the right thing. It's a selfish mindset, I know. So why do we care about being better, let alone around other people? Sure, we need friends and social interactions to function in the world, but it's not like it would stop me from killing myself. Wouldn't even be the first time I tried. And more importantly, why was I being excused for all of this? Well, while replaying this game, I finally got a proper answer. I used to pretend to be one of those Sigma males that doesn't care about what other people think. I mean, I'm sure you hear that a lot on the internet, especially Twitter. At some point you end up realizing, no, you do care about what people think. Or at least I care about what other people think. I cared enough to at least not be that guy for like a minimum of 5 minutes, which was more than other people could say for the actual bad people at that school. It's not that I'm a good person deep down, but the difference between me and those other people is that I actually tried to be better. Or something like that. I don't know. There's just something about seeing birds flying and simply living life that makes me want to keep trying to be like that, and maybe even better myself even further along the way. I can never be a truly redeemed individual, but what's the shame in trying? I get that I'm not supposed to talk about my personal life with the viewer. Content creators like me aren't your friends, and we never will be. No matter how my video is spliced, I'm just a random guy babbling about video games on a computer screen. And it's more than likely that you don't know the first thing about me. Heck, I don't even know the first thing about me. I'm asexual and aromantic, which is good, but I'm also ambidextrous, ambiverted, and diagnosed with Asperger's, severe anxiety, and depression. Yet somehow I care about other people's emotions and want them to be happy? Have I not been the type of person that wants to do everything by himself? That's what I've done for most of my life. I've been conditioned to believe that no matter what people say to me, good or bad, it feels like they're lying to me, even if it's my friends and especially my family. How would I know that they aren't just being nice to shut me up? I could use it as a means to poke fun at their rare care for me, because that seems to be the one thing I know how to do in life. Why should other people take me seriously if I can't even take myself seriously? But more importantly, why am I still whining? Life is hard by nature. I don't have to get used to it, but that doesn't mean I can't plow through it and make the best of it. I'm not the best person alive, and I never will be, but that does not make me a villain. Regardless of who I used to be, I have room for redemption. So I'm gonna do whatever I can to focus on that redemption as much as possible. And no moss will slow me down. It will not sway me, condescend me, or convince me otherwise. It's easy to forget that the best people in my life are more than willing to overlook whatever I've done. That includes my friends, my family, and maybe even some people that I've never met in real life. And even though you've never met me, trust me when I say this applies to you too. Only you control the direction of your life. Yes, it is absolutely selfish to say, but that's how humans are, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes it's better to put yourself first. Everyone wants to change. Everyone wants to grow. Everyone wants to fly like the birds. But they don't know why they want to. But this brings us to what Tales of Berseria is all about. Let's get back to that infamous, notorious question. Do you know why birds fly? Well, it's cliched, but if you dig deep enough inside of you, you'll understand why. Trust me when I say that your flaws just might be the greatest thing about you. It's proof that you're truly alive. It may be underwhelming to say this, but birds fly because they want to fly. Not because they have to, not because they were ordered to, not even because they were cursed to, but because they want to, and for no other reason. Wow. Yeah, I'm putting down the fucking script at this point, because wow. I mean, this game is only like around, 30 gigabytes at most? Most AAA games can't even say half that much, despite having double or even triple the file size. Yet despite all of this, we live in a society where people wake up and unironically decide to say that this game isn't even my favorite game in the Tales series. yeah, despite how much I love this game, there are actually at least 2 more Tales games that I prefer. I mean, it's easily in my top 5 favorite Tales games, but it's always battling with Symphonia for like my 3rd or 4th favorite Tales game. Every time I think about each game, I can never decide which one I like more. But still, speaks volumes as to how good the Tales series is. Doesn't it?